Thank you. A week ago, I stood at this microphone and talked about 5 stories that I think the mainstream press has left uncovered or undercovered. I always felt that under our Constitution, we have 3 branches of government. Now we're in a lot of trouble. And when I think of the 3 branches of government, I think which one would disappoint our forefathers the most? I think it would be the judiciary, which doesn't have an adequate respect for the U.S. Constitution. But our Constitution also presupposed an active press corps doing a good job of informing the public of the issues of the day. I don't think these issues have been adequately covered, and one more time, I'd just like to touch upon what I believe are 5 key issues that have been in the news but undercovered by the press. The first one is what is going on at our border. In December, we hit a new all-time high of the number of people crossing the border and staying in this country. That was 370,000. Sometimes the press, and for whatever reason some of my colleagues, talks about the number of contacts with Border Patrol. They do not talk about the number of people let in the country. But 370,000 easily is the highest amount we've had in a month. By point of reference, under the prior administration, the number let in per month in the final year would vary from $5,000 to $20,000 people a month. We are now have increased things by a factor of about 18 to 1, and it creates the biggest threat to the future of our republic that is out there. In addition to the 370,000 people crossing the border, all of which will be schooled here, all of which, as promised in his election bid, will receive free medical care. And by the way, I should point out that many Americans don't get free medical care. They're either uninsured or have $20,000 deductibles. No, our president has promised the new immigrants here free, unlimited health care. But with those people come, depending on the month, 8 to 10,000 in unaccompanied minors. We do not allow 7 or 8-year-olds to wander around the country if they are born here. We are now getting, depending on the month, 8 to 1,000 unaccompanied minors. Obviously a recipe for human trafficking. Obviously a recipe for being mistreated, being allowed to work in factories all hours. The administration has not done anywhere near an adequate job of keeping track of these folks and where they are. They have intentionally said that we are not going to be giving out DNA tests so that if somebody wants to be a sponsor and claims to be an uncle for little Missy, we have no idea whether that's true or not. Depending upon who's doing the counting, we've lost somewhere between 30 and 80,000 of these unaccompanied minors somewhere in the country. For a press corps that in the past has concerns about families being broken up, that only happened for a couple weeks at a time and only when it was absolutely necessary. Here we have tens of thousands of young children without either parent, possibly never seeing them again. It is a story that ought to be talked about, and it ought to be graphs in the front page of every newspaper in the country that we are now letting in 370,000 people. It should also be more accurately covered the number of people who are dying of preventable but overdoses in narcotics. We are over 100,000 a year. I am old enough to remember the Vietnam War, where there was so great a concern as we lost 57,000 American servicemen over 12 years. 57,000 American servicemen over 12 years, over 100,000 people killed every year by illegal drugs crossing our southern border. I think the mainstream media ought to do more to point this out. If people die in a murder, if people die in a car accident, it always makes the local pages. This is far more than the number of murders plus car accidents every year, and we ought to do a better job of educating the public the number of people dying in any individual county. That is an underreported story and will result in the end of America. We do report that there is currently a war going on between Hamas and Israel. And it has been reported that that war was started 100% by Hamas, which stormed across the border, raping women, cutting the heads off of little children, killing over 1,000 people. I believe that the American press is not, and I think some members of the American public believe the reason this war began is that in some fashion Palestinians were being mistreated by being adjacent to Israel. This is not true at all and has been underreported what a potentially good situation one had prior to this war if one lived in Gaza. During the initial invasion, the horrific invasion, some people may have noticed that some of the people killed were from Thailand. Other peoples may have noticed that some of the people who were held hostage were from Thailand. I don't think the mainstream media has done a good job of explaining why that was. It is because if you lived in Gaza or near Gaza, there were all sorts of good jobs that were made available by being at or near Israel. Recently appeared in the paper that up to 25,000 people from Ecuador wanted to move to Israel to take these jobs. These jobs are better jobs than almost anywhere else in the Arab world. Indeed, why would people from Ecuador or people from Thailand come from halfway around the world to live in Israel? Because it's a wonderful place to live, people are well paid, and even though you're leaving your family behind, it's a highly desirable life. I think if one considers the number of people from other parts around the world who are coming to Israel to work, one would realize that the case that Hamas has made to society as a whole, that they were a put upon minority, disappears. And it shows 100% of the sympathy in the current conflict, or the beginning of the conflict, should stand with Israel. Israel right now is looking to put forth agreements with other countries of people who want to come and take jobs, many of which used to be taken by Palestinians. People from the Philippines, people from Vietnam are also going to be coming to Israel because of the huge progress, economic progress, that is made by the Jews in Israel as they have taken a land that was considered almost entirely a wasteland 60 years ago and turned it into one of the most modern countries in the world. I'll also point out a very tolerant country. In Gaza itself, run by the Palestinians, they would not have any Jewish temples. But in Israel proper, there are over 400 Muslim mosques which operate and are allowed to operate by the Israeli government. So I think if we're going to educate the American public what's going on in this Hamas-Israel war, we have to let the American public know how many people wish they could come to Israel to work. The next issue, and I talk to people about this all the time when I go back home, and we'll talk about it again, is the attitude of the new head of the Joint Chiefs, General Brown, towards his diversity initiative. Now, traditionally, America has gotten where it is by being a meritocracy, and people advance whether they're good or bad. Of all the parts of society, the part of society that had better never cease to be number one is our American military. Nevertheless, the head of the Joint Chiefs has publicly said he wants to reduce the number of white male officers from something in the 60% down to, I believe, 42%, 44 or 42%. Again, this is a fundamental change in the way the military has naturally done things. They want to operate like a little second-rate community college in which they're more concerned about the race or where people's great-great-grandparents were born than about making sure we have the right person for the job. I think this is something that should be discussed about more, even though General Brown has been confirmed, finding out what exactly is being done in achieving this goal. On a subcommittee that I am fortunate enough to chair, we had a hearing on this topic, and we found out that there is a perception, which probably is true, that people who are white are treated poorly, and as the result, we are not meeting our recruiting goals because white people are realizing, perhaps accurately, that they are going to have a hard time in the military, and when it comes time to be promoted, they are going to be viewed hostilely. I think that's something we must look at more. The next thing to talk about is we have tax credits which are benefiting the wealthiest developers in our society, and we are expanding the use of those credits under the tax bill that I voted for because of other good provisions in a tax law passed a couple weeks ago. I personally think the low-income Section 42 tax credits are the worst in the tax code. They give money to well-heeled developers in which they are allowed to have 70% of their building paid for by the government, a lavish subsidy in which the already wealthy members of society become wealthier still. And finally, I would mention that at the prayer breakfast we had a week ago, and something else that's been understated.
Time for the gentleman from California has expired.
Thank you, and we'll talk about that next week, and I yield the remainder of my time to Congressman LaMotta.
Thank you.